Hi everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining this informational webinar relating to the Geospatial Data and Technical Support Facility for Humanitarians in East Africa. My name is Nikki McGo. I'm co-lead of Caribou Digital's Space and Climate Practice, and I'm the Programme Director overseeing the management of this technical assistance facility. So the objectives of today are to tell you a little bit more about this facility, which we launched last week. We'll plan to spend roughly half the time of this hour-long session to tell you a bit more of the background and finer details of what support is on offer, and then details of how you can apply and submit any further questions. So we'll be sure to save enough time for questions that come up today in the second half of this meeting. And so with that, if I can just draw your attention to the Q&A button, which you should find in the toolbar or maybe under the more, the three dots and the more icon. There you can add any questions that come to your mind during this webinar. You can also upvote other people's questions and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can towards the end of the session. But rest assured that if we don't manage to get to it today, we'll be making a recording of this webinar available on the Call for Applications website, but also we'll be uploading a frequently asked questions document that will contain all of the questions raised today along with the responses. So do put anything that comes to mind in there and we'll make sure that they're addressed either during this webinar or later and submitted to the website. Okay, so a little bit of background on who we are and why we're doing this. So Caribou Space, well, we work at the intersection of those developing digital tools and geospatial data products, and those working on tackling really big global issues with the overall objective of improving outcomes such as climate resilience, sustainable development, or humanitarian operations. And so we like to see ourselves kind of at the intersection of some very different communities and trying to bridge those communities and help them to better understand each other. And for the past 3 years, we've been working with the UK Humanitarian Innovation Hub. UKHIH is funded by the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and they focus on harnessing UK and global expertise and capabilities for problem-led systems innovation in the humanitarian sector. And they're really interested in exploring different topics which have potential to improve the humanitarian system. And so since starting working with them in 2021, we've been looking at the area of satellite technologies and geospatial data. So back in 2021, they commissioned us to produce a landscaping report which summarized kind of the current level of activity and state of play in the use of satellite technologies for humanitarian emergencies. And so that report was very broad, both in terms of the technologies it looked at and the humanitarian contexts and domains that it looked at. We released it in summer 2022. Please do go and have a look at it. It's got some really good background information on how satellite technology can be used in humanitarian assistance, who are the main players, where do we see real potential for impact. And in that report, we also uncovered, or we actually conducted a lot of community engagement and workshops. And whilst we were trying to show the real potential for these technologies, we also uncovered a fair number of barriers that we heard from people like yourselves in the humanitarian community. And they were really barriers around why people felt like they weren't able to really realize the full potential of satellite technology and geospatial data. And we kept hearing that there were these technical barriers, awareness barriers, knowledge barriers, a whole host of different barriers that we kind of looked into in that research study. And so that was a really interesting finding for us that we kind of heard a bit of this pushback from the community. And so last year we came back to this report and the UKHIH supported us to take a bit more time to revisit these challenges that we had uncovered. And they supported us to lead a short ideation process, which enabled us to dig into some of those issues a bit more and really try and understand some of these system level constraints. And what we did during that process was we spoke to a lot of people, we conducted kind of a lot of interviews and research, and then we brought together a number of humanitarians into some co-creation ideation workshops we ran this whole process over 4 months, and we really tried to brainstorm new ideas and hear people's ideas for how we could address some of the constraints that we faced in the system. And this slide is really just to kind of summarize some of the problem statements that we heard. And it was a great process for being able to listen to people working in the humanitarian sector and understand where you were all coming from. So I guess I would highlight just 3 problem statements that came out of that process. The first was that around kind of justifying the use of innovation broadly, but new technologies, and particularly data where it was seen to require kind of an investment in time and in resources, and really heard from people that it was sometimes hard to put that case forward to explain why we wanted to use geospatial data and what benefits it would have. Secondly, we talked a lot about capability and capacity and knowledge, and people knowing where to go to access that data, knowing how to actually use it and make the most of it, and really derive value from the data and the platforms that are out there. And thirdly, there was a real acknowledgement that there's lots of support out there. There's lots of training programs, there's lots of data available. But actually, it's all quite fragmented, and it's quite difficult to know where to look if you're not already very well versed in geospatial data, and if you don't have an expert on hand to talk to about this. And so these are some of the quotes that we heard from people during that process, and has kind of led to us to where we are today. And so this latest phase that we've been working on since around April time is all about developing new tools that can support greater uptake of geospatial data by filling some of the gaps that are in the current ecosystem. So all through this process, over the last 3 phases of us working in this area, we've had a real passion for kind of outreach and engagement, and really just talking to the community. We recognize that we operate right on the fringes of the humanitarian sector. We want to understand humanitarian needs a lot better, so that hopefully those developing technology and tools can better serve those needs. And so we want to make sure that all of the work that we do is valuable to those of you working in this community. And so there's 3 things that we're doing in this project, and one of those is kind of directly related to this technical assistance support. So the first thing is that we're really working on trying to articulate a much clearer value proposition and kind of business case for why humanitarians should use geospatial data. And we're doing that through compiling an evidence review, really understanding what literature is out there, what case studies, what we've learned so far from the use of geospatial data in humanitarian emergencies. So that's a piece of work that we'll be working on over the next 6 to 9 months, and we'll be releasing for people to use as a real public good into the evidence base and into the literature. Secondly, we really want to address this idea of inequitable access to knowledge. So we want to try and do as much as we can to remove barriers to knowledge, to remove the constraints that people face if they don't know the technical jargon or the right people to access some of this information. And so we'll be working on providing a knowledge repository that is almost a one-stop shop for people to get very customized guidance to what they're trying to do, know where to look for the right resources. And so that will be a kind of online knowledge repository, which will also allow people to kind of ask questions or specific tasks that they are trying to do. And then thirdly, the thing that really relates to this technical assistance facility is really helping organizations to make better use of what is already out there. So recognizing there's plenty of data, plenty of tools that could be used, but many people just need a bit more support to understand how to integrate that into their operations, into their day-to-day practices. And so really calling this very low-hanging fruit. So what we're looking to do with this technical assistance facility is work with a number of organizations to kind of take you through that process and make it really work for what you're trying to do. Okay, so that's the journey we've been on to get to this point. So now just going to present a little bit, introducing you to what support we're offering before handing over to our delivery partners for this facility. So, the overall aim of this technical assistance facility is to build skills that will enable you to make ongoing use of geospatial tools and to adopt a data-driven approach to your operations. And so success for us is that organizations that we support feel better prepared to face kind of weather-related disasters, are a bit more aware of the context, the physical and human context of the operating context that you're working in, and altogether better equipped for data-driven decision-making. And so all of that hopefully will have the overall impact of improving the efficiency and cost effectiveness, targeting and impactfulness of your humanitarian operations. So that's the overall aim. And at a high level, this is our estimated time frame for the support. So it's a relatively condensed process. We have a total of 6 months to deliver this support end to end. And really where we are today is that application process is open and ongoing. We invite you to submit your application for receiving this support. We will then go through a screening process. And at that point, a shortlisted number of organizations will work with us on scoping out exactly what the engagement looks like, exactly how we're going to support you. We'll do some introductory training to get everyone on the same page about what is geospatial data, how can it be used, help you to kind of get to grips with some of the kind of tools that can be used. And then we'll go into the one-on-one technical support delivery, which will be a combination of virtual meetings, offline preparatory work for each organization to do, and then face-to-face hands-on training sessions. And alongside all of that, Caribou will be leading some insights work where we'll be trying to learn as much as we can from across the board of all the different engagements, share more widely in the community what we're learning from those engagements, how we might recommend other capacity building initiatives could be done differently, and what common questions we hear from yourselves as we go through these technical assistance engagements. And all of that can feed back into the knowledge repository that I mentioned earlier, which is kind of this one-stop shop of information and resources. So we're going to be able to use some of those engagements to really understand some of the challenges you're facing and how we can make that online support better as well. And so what does that require from yourselves if you're going to apply? Well, these are the kind of expectations we would have of anyone applying for this support. So first of all, that you would participate in that scoping exercise to discuss your needs and to think through what a technical engagement might look like. To attend a group training session, which will have dual benefits of understanding more about geospatial data and platforms, but also that knowledge sharing element of different peer-to-peer exchange of your experiences and the challenges you face, and providing you a bit more support from the cohort. We were expecting a minimum of 5 days that you can dedicate to this assignment. So some of that work will be done in your own time. Some of that work will be done through meetings and face-to-face engagement. And then we're really looking for people who can try and commit to, taking action to sustain and extend the use of geospatial data in your organization or even beyond. So what we're really hoping is that can be a real step change in the way that you work, and that there will be efforts to kind of continue that beyond the end of the engagement and to try and promote this, become a bit of a champion for this within your organization. And then lastly, just to support some of our insights efforts and kind of advocacy and promotion work, we would ask that those involved in the engagements either can help us by doing a short interview on their experiences, or writing something about your experiences, or answering a survey, just to help us understand how it went for you and what you might share with other organizations. Okay, so that's a lot of information from me. I'm now going to hand over to our partners who we're working with on all of these efforts. I'm really excited to be working with both the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team and Map Action. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Duncan Cabot from the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to talk a little bit more about them and how they're working on this engagement. Over to you, Duncan.
Sure. Thanks, Nikki. Hi, everyone. My name is Duncan Cabot from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, specifically the regional offices for Eastern South Africa. We are an international team dedicated to humanitarian action and community development through open mapping. Open mapping is basically open mapping technology is a paradigm shift from the traditional ways in which individuals, organizations used to create and update map data and also use map data for a variety of humanitarian applications. And it's a paradigm shift that encourages more collaborative approach to creating, updating map data, whereby individuals, organizations, local communities can be able to not only easily access these tools, but also contribute and use these map data. As an organization, we implement a lot of mapping projects within the region to aid in preparedness and response of in existing crises, and also through this specific technical assistance facility, we look forward to providing technical and programmatic geospatial support to a variety of humanitarian organizations. Basically, earlier on, the way I was talking about open mapping tools, so we work a lot with volunteers worldwide to be able to contribute to some of these existing collaborative tools that encourages use of these geospatial data. One of them being the OpenStreetMap, which relies a lot on crowdsourcing and basically mapping process to be simplified. Is basically a tool, or it's a multi-stage process. One of them, which is remote mapping. So we do a lot of projects together with partners, various organizations, to be able to coordinate data generation, map data generation exercises for a number of humanitarian disaster response projects. And also we offer a lot of customized training programs to local mapping organizations with the goal of building their resilience. We have a big strength of having a diverse network of humanitarian organizations and volunteers within the region. And also, as an organization, we utilize, support, and develop a variety of open source tools, which helps a lot with trying to bridge some of the early identified challenges through the earlier research with Caribou's face, which is access to some of these tools to various local level organizations. We also have a specific experience in mapping specifically in very high risk context. Back to you, Nikki.
Gemma, do you want to present a little bit from Map Action side?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Gemma Davis. I'm the head of Geospatial Services at Map Action. And Map Action are a humanitarian information management charity that are very much focused on producing maps and working with spatial data. We've been working in emergency response for over 20 years now, and that is traditionally what we did. We responded in the aftermath of sudden onset emergencies with UN disaster response teams, and that was our model for a number of years. And then we really started to expand into a lot more training of local and regional organisations to develop their geospatial skills. And a much higher proportion of our work now is in this training capacity development. We've also diversified a lot more. We work a lot more with regional partners and national bodies rather than just UN agencies. And the nature of our work has expanded a lot. So we're doing a lot of anticipatory action work, subnational risk modelling. We've got a growing health programme as well. In terms of practically how we operate, we actually have a relatively small staff team of around 30 staff, but a much wider pool of expert volunteers. So these are people who are geospatial professionals or maybe data scientists and things like that in their day jobs, working in a range of industries. Some of them are academics, some of them are working in private sector organisations, some of them are working for government organisations. And they are the ones who deploy in the aftermath of emergencies, or also help us to reach out and deliver our training. We use a really wide variety of technology to produce real-time maps, both paper-based and online, to undertake data analysis. And we collaborate with a really wide variety of humanitarian agencies to ensure accurate and useful data dissemination. One of our key strengths is that volunteer pool. So as I've already said, this is a pool of around 70 expert volunteers who are working in lots of different industries. And that means we've got people who specialise both in different skill sets, but also in different subject areas. So we might have a flood modelling expert, for example, even though that's not our primary expertise. And we've got all sorts of people that we can draw on for different things. We're going to move on now to talk more generally about why geospatial data is useful. What do we mean by geospatial data, and how could geospatial data help you? So firstly, what is geospatial data? In essence, it's any form of data that has information with a location attached to it. So that might be obvious things like places, the location of a settlement or an administrative area. It can be population, so population distribution, and that might be associated with places or admin areas, census data, for example, or it can be modelled population distribution where we have that spread out every 100 metres of the globe, estimates of how many people live there. It's also obvious things like natural features, rivers, lakes, elevation, forest, coastline, all those kind of features. And then infrastructure, your roads, your health facilities, your schools. So you can imagine, you've probably all seen all of those features on maps at some point. But it's also anything else with a real world location. That might be current precipitation, it might be where the location of the weekly market takes place or an event is happening. So the breadth of geospatial data is huge, and some of that is very transient. What the weather is doing now, what the weather's predicted to do next week. Some of it is quite static over time. Elevation rarely changes unless you've had a major volcanic eruption, for example. So the pace of which data updates is also very variable. The location information as well can vary. So one option is that you have coordinates associated with the feature. So a line of latitude or longitude, some numbers that tell you where on the globe a location is based. But more commonly, you have data that relates to locations that we already know. So it might be administrative boundaries, and then we know the population associated with them. So we can join that tabular information to existing spatial locations. It might be locations of shelters in the aftermath of an emergency, and we've already got a data set that shows the shelters, and then you can update that with a number of people in them. So lots of data can become spatial by linking it to other information. We can move on to next slide. So I just want to think a little bit now about how data can turn into information, and then how that then turns into knowledge. So I thought the easiest way to explain this was with a very simplified example that has potentially come out of one of our responses. So we'll assume we have population data, and prepared data might be data that's very neat and ready to use. It might also sometimes be a bit messy. It needs a little bit of cleaning and tidying up to make sense of it. But in this instance, let's assume we've got some population data, we've got some settlement locations, and we have a set of coordinates of reported road blockages. So they're each individual data sets that are potentially useful in their own right, but don't tell us a lot on their own. From that, we can turn that into information. So we can combine the population and settlement location to know what the population per settlement is. And then we could take something like sphere standards for water requirements and calculate the water requirements for each of those settlements based on their population. That tells us something then much more informative about that need. We can also take the coordinates of the road blockages and we can map them which starts to tell us which routes remain accessible, which routes have been blocked. That all leads us then to knowledge of how much water needs to be distributed to where and by what route we can transport it. So you can see how we can sometimes work backwards from this as well. We know the question we need to answer, and then we think about what information and what data sets can feed into that. And one of the things that we can help you with is thinking about those flows. What are the questions you need to answer, and what data and analysis will help you to get to that point. I'll hand back to Duncan at this point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in the ever-changing landscape of humanitarian work, you realize that timely and informed decision-making is usually very critical, and this is where now geospatial data becomes a powerful tool and a resource for transforming how we are able to prepare for, respond to, and recover from crisis. Yeah, so the power of these geospatial data, it enables us to be able to provide a comprehensive view of the landscapes in which you're operating, by enabling us to see just beyond the immediate challenges and plan with foresight. It just goes beyond just maps, and it's now about unlocking insights that lead to smarter and more effective humanitarian operations. When it comes to preparing for disasters, imagine being able to anticipate, let's say, areas that are very prone to flooding or the path of a storm before it hits, or identifying communities most at risk during these crises. These data, especially data, will allow us to capture all these early warning signs to be able to pinpoint vulnerable locations and ensure that interventions are targeted and they are directed to where they're needed the most. When it comes to response, when a disaster strikes, every second counts. So data, especially location-based data over here, can help us to be able to quickly assess the impact, prioritize the resources, and also implement solutions that could lead to saving lives, from determining example of safe evacuation routes, case of an earthquake or flooding, to ensuring that aid reaches to the hardest hit areas. This data can be our guide in the midst of this chaos. And last but not least, when it comes to recovery, work usually doesn't stop once the crisis is over, and this location-based data is also very crucial in the recovery phase, whereby generating an inventory of the damaged infrastructure and monitoring population movement will help a lot the communities build stronger than before. So in conclusion, by integrating these location-based data into every stage of these humanitarian operations, there is potential of not only just improving our response, but also building resilience for future. And with these insights at our fingertips, we and organizations, communities at the very local levels are better equipped to face these challenges of today and tomorrow. So with regard to some of the questions that geospatial data can be able to answer, just as I mentioned earlier, it just goes beyond having a map and what does data in this what does this data mean? And this is where now the insights extracted from all these analysis of these tools. It's a powerful tool that can help us answer critical questions and providing insights needed to make informed decisions during humanitarian crisis, starting from understanding where. One, being able to pinpoint exact locations, whether it's identifying areas most affected by disaster or relocating very critical infrastructure, knowing where is the first step in any effective response, and it sets a stage for everything that follows. And just beyond knowing where things are, now these geospatial data can help us understand the relationships between these different elements. For example, how do population centers relate to, let's say, for example, the spread of a disease or the extent of flood or the extent of earthquake damage, and how does the proximity to resources to the affected communities, how does proximity to resources affect the community resilience during this crisis? So these insights are usually very vital for targeted interventions. Especially in crisis situations where decisions around finding the best location about guide resource location, site selection can have can have consequences. So having a basis for making these decisions is very key, and geospatial data can help in identifying the best locations for the refugee camps, an example, resource distribution points and other critical infrastructure, ensuring that help reaches those who need it the most and as quickly as possible. And then also when it comes to making predictions, also there's a potential within these in which geospatial data also allows us to look ahead just beyond the current situation, in which from the data that you have can be able to analyze patterns and trends and predict the future risk. Such an example is cholera outbreak in a specific area, or the areas can model the areas most vulnerable to, let's say, for example, the next flooding event or a storm. And these predictions enables proactive measures reducing the harm before it happens. The other important question that can be answered from this geospatial data is measuring the size, shape, and distribution. So understanding the scale and distribution of impacts is also very key in managing any response, whether it's just mapping the spread of informal settlements or measuring the extent of flood damage. This location-based data can provide quantitative foundation for effective planning and response. And last but not least is detecting patterns in which location-based data exists a lot at detecting location specific patterns that aren't immediately obvious from data, from just any sort of data. And this can help a lot with tracking, and it could be diseases spread, and then understanding migration flows in case of crisis. And this pattern is always very important to reveal the underlying dynamics of a crisis, allowing us to respond more strategically. So at every stage of the humanitarian action or response, whether it's preparation or recovery, this location-based data can help answer critical questions and provide a targeted guide to the response, and through turning raw information into actionable insights, helping us save lives and rebuild communities more effectively. I'd like to talk about a specific case study that is one of the projects that we implemented in Zimbabwe. That is the Anticipatory Response Program. These ones of initiatives at the forefront of shifting from reactive to proactive disaster management. And we implemented this project in Zimbabwe due to its high vulnerability to natural hazards, specifically one of the districts that was the Rabani district. So this is one of the collaborative projects in which we work closely together with Caritas and the government at the very local level to be able to, first of all, understand to understand what the challenges that communities are having on that very local level, and ground our analysis in local realities and response to specific needs at the of the most at need. So through this program, we're able to map vulnerabilities through the use of open mapping tools, So we're able to collect and use these open mapping tools to analyze critical data on vulnerable households, essential infrastructure, and natural hazard zones. And through analysis of this data, the program was able to create detailed actionable maps that highlighted the locations of evacuation centers, road networks, and the areas most at risk. And this is one of our most success stories in which we're able to work closely with local organizations to be able to turn geospatial data into concrete life-saving actions. And the map, and not only the maps, but the insights generated from this program was very key in the development of multi-hazard contingency plans for the wards in Zimbabwe. And these plans are continuously updated, and the dynamics tools to update and reflect the evolving risks in Zimbabwe to ensure that communities are always prepared in case of any forthcoming disaster. So through this project, also a significant achievement was success in empowering the local entities, that is the local organizations, communities, through extensive training and local organizations. So they were able to gain skills and confidence needed to use these digital mapping tools and transition from the just manual paper-based methods to digital maps this presented a major step forward in the region's disaster preparedness capabilities. Back to you, Nikki. Thanks.
I'd like to just jump in now with a slightly different case study from some of the work that Map Action has been doing. And this is one of our emergency responses, but probably one of our less standard emergency responses. So typically we deploy quite rapidly in a sudden onset disaster and are working in those earlier stages of the response. In this case, we were responding through a regional partner in the Caribbean, SEDEMA, to wildfires that were happening in Belize back in June actually that should be this year, I put a typo there, that was June 2024. But we were responding a little bit later on in the disaster. So this wasn't so much about directing where the firefighting needed to happen or where people were affected and needing to displace. It was looking a little bit slower paced at some of that recovery stage and some of the longer term impacts from the disaster. We sent a team of 2 volunteers out, and they were working with the NEMO, which is the National Disaster Management Agency in Belize, directly with 2 of their geospatial staff who had just a little bit less expertise in this particular area. We were able to mentor and work alongside them. So one of the main pieces we work on was looking at where had actually been burnt, where the burnt areas were, and how that related to buildings or agriculture and other things like that. And I realise you won't be able to see any of the detail on these maps here, so I'll explain what they mean. They're just illustrative, really. But the biggest map you see here with the on the left-hand side has these sort of pale yellowy orange areas, and they represent indicative extents of the burnt areas. And for this kind of data, there are a lot of data providers who are already using Earth observation data to produce secondary analysis. So in this case, it was Copernicus. So we were using some of that data, but we're also using Sentinel-2 satellite imagery, from which we were able to do some of our own analysis of burnt areas. And then you can see that there are dots on there that are showing the buildings represented both in a Google data set and in a Humanitarian OpenStreetMap data set. So sometimes it's quite useful to have a comparison of multiple data sources as well. There were other things that we were working on in that response. So some of it was just improving data sets that already existed, helping get them into a good format that were ready to use and getting those mapped. So one example of that is shelter locations. And the classification for shelter locations is actually built on their use in different cyclone contexts, but broader use in the department. So again, just being able to work alongside and help improve some data sets like that. And then the example on the far right, this one that's sort of quite brightly coloured yellow and red, this is again an example of us being able to identify existing secondary data sets that are available globally or for a particular part of the world, and help bring them into usage by a local agency. And this is representing rainfall triggered landslide hazards. Now, you might wonder why we're looking at rainfall triggered landslide hazards in a wildfire response. But actually, while we were there was forecast extremely heavy rain, and there was a lot of fear of flash flooding and then corresponding landslides. So the landslide risk became quite relevant for us to be working out, particularly for some of the higher risk areas. So really it just gives you a bit of a flavour of the range of data sets. We might, in another response, have occupancy for shelter or needs for the different shelters. And we might be able to map the displaced population. We can count how many buildings are in those burnt areas. But a lot of our responses do also give us that opportunity to do a bit of mentoring, to do some handover, to do some capacity building while we're there. And I'll hand back at that point.
Thanks so much, Gemma, and thanks so much, Duncan. Really great to give everyone a bit of an insight into your work and how this could be of use. So I've seen some of the questions coming through, and I'm very hopeful that this last section will address some of those kind of practical questions that some of you have about this call for application. So I'll do my best to respond to the ones that I've seen in the Q&A box, but please keep those questions coming if you have anything else on your mind. So in terms of this call for application, so this is now open. We launched this last week, and we are using an application platform called Submittable for this. It's been designed to make this as simple as possible for you to apply. That said, if you do have any issues using that platform or actually submitting the application, please do consult the resources on the website. There's some really good technical guidance there from Submittable, or let us know by email what the difficulties are, and we'll do our very best to try and resolve them as quickly as possible. But I'm going to speak a little bit about what we're asking from you in that application form, but just a couple of administrative details to start with. The first thing to say is that after careful consideration, we've decided that at this point, it's only feasible for us to offer the technical support in English due to the group of technical experts that we're working with, but also communication needs across our partners and in the team. So if we're in that, because we're going to be delivering the technical support in English, we also ask that you submit your application in English. That said, the application form does enable you to submit responses in whatever format is easiest and most comfortable for you. So if that's a written response or an audio file or video file, we really don't mind. Use whatever is most natural for you and most where you can most easily get your message across. And you can do that for each different question. You can use a different format if you so wish. We will let you know by early October if you've been shortlisted, and just keep in mind that all of the actual engagements would need to end by the end of February next year. So who is eligible? And I know there's been a few questions on this, so I'll try my best to answer them. So perhaps the most obvious criteria to point out is that we're interested to work with humanitarians. And by that, we mean people working in humanitarian organizations with a humanitarian mission and purpose. So we're here to try and support you to be able to use geospatial data to help you to do your job, to help you fulfill your organizational mission, using some of the data that Gemma and Duncan have just done a great job at kind of highlighting and explaining. So you don't need to have a lot of expertise. You don't need to have very much background knowledge of geospatial data, but we're really looking for people who are interested in and curious about how this can be used. And you know, as long as you're interested and motivated to find out more, that's a great sign for us. The other thing I wanted to say in terms of who is most eligible, I think one of the things that came out of our ideation process and the workshops I talked about before was that we really wanted to find out from humanitarians what kind of support was required, but also what kind of support is already available. So what we're trying to do here is we're particularly interested in filling what we see as a real gap, where there are many organizations that don't have in-house support, don't have in-house GIS experts, for example, and don't have kind of a team in-house to do that for them. So whilst we will still consider applications where that is the case, the gap that we really want to try and fill is for people that don't have other ways of accessing this support. And so please do tell us about kind of your existing level of support that you have within your organization. And lastly, we're looking to help you better prepare for and better respond to weather-related disasters. So I know Gemma just mentioned some, but floods, droughts, landslides, fires. So we'd like to help with that specific type of challenge and that kind of data. For now, we are focusing on organizations in the 8 nominated countries in East Africa. The reason for these countries was that during our previous phase, we established more networks in East Africa, and we thought it would be much easier to promote this call through those networks. We've also chosen countries within that region broadly, but just to reiterate that the support will need to be delivered in English. And so representatives and organizations submitting those applications will need to be comfortable enough operating in English for this. So for those that are shortlisted for support, we will then go into a lot more details about what kind of... Hi. Was there a question? Okay, I'll just finish off, and then please do carry on or send a question in the Q&A box. For those who are shortlisted, there'll be this scoping assessment that I spoke about earlier to really dig into the details of what support you're looking for and what kind of commitments and expectations we have on each side. In terms of requirements, it's listed there, we will need you to have a decent internet connection to be able to access some of the software and data platforms. So do just bear that in mind. And we've provided a link within the application form for you to test your internet speed in case you want to check whether you can meet those requirements. I've already said a little bit about, what we're looking for here and in terms of people who are enthusiastic and committed to learning more about geospatial data. I guess the other 2 things that I touched on earlier, but I just want to reiterate, is that we're really hoping to support organizations who believe that a stronger use of data, a data-driven approach, could change your operations for the better, and where there's more likely to be kind of for you to realize that impact and see a positive change, but also to be willing to try and sustain that and do this over the long term. So we're particularly interested to hear in the applications how you could commit to supporting that integration of data, of a data-driven approach, but also get the support of others in your organization and help to kind of grow that approach with your colleagues and potentially partners. So we're really interested in those wider benefits. So if there are, if you're looking to address a challenge that might be relevant for other people, where there's lots of other organizations trying to address that challenge as well, that helps us because we're really all about kind of promoting wider lessons and learning for the sector as a whole. And so the more kind of common and relatable the challenges are that you're looking at, and more that we can extract generalizable insights, then that helps us to expand the impact of the work that we're doing and the resources that we're committing to this facility. And that includes if you're working with partners in your humanitarian operations and you think that they could also stand to benefit from a data-driven approach, then do tell us. I think that's really a great way for us to understand how this support could have even wider indirect benefits. And so just last slide, before we open up to any more questions that I haven't yet managed to answer, just to reiterate our commitment to kind of learning and wider benefits. So while we acknowledge that we're not going to be able to work with, we're really enthused and excited to see how many of you have been interested in this call for applications over even the first week of it. And we really appreciate all of you taking the time to attend this webinar and to find out more about it. We're also aware we're not going to be able to work with every single organization that applies. And that's just unfortunate, but we're really committed to having the broadest possible impact. And I think that we're doing that through 3 things. First of all, we're going to try and work with a group of organizations that are somewhat different to each other so that we can learn as much as possible about different experiences and different backgrounds of organization. So we're going to try and diversify that cohort of organizations as much as possible to maximize learning. Secondly, I've already spoken a little bit about this, but we're going to try and share insights and lessons from those engagements. So our role as Caribou is not in the delivery of the support, but really trying to understand how that support is being delivered, what are the common issues, what are the things that we can feed back to the community for other organizations to learn from, but also for other capacity building initiatives to learn from. Like, how could the system be better designed to support the types of organizations that we're trying to reach here, where we see that there's a real gap in the support that's currently available. And then lastly, I mentioned before, but we are producing this online knowledge repository, a multimedia repository, which will be a one-stop shop informational resource hub for people to use. And so that's currently in development, and we're really trying to strengthen the linkages between that and this piece of work, so that what we're learning from the individual technical engagements that we're working on here within this technical assistance facility, the learnings and the questions that you raise are then fed back into that knowledge resource hub, so that they can be of benefit to everyone else as well. So next steps will be that this recording will be made available with the call for applications, including written responses to all the questions that we've had today. I'll just see if there's any others that I can try and tackle while we're still online. Beatrice, you've asked whether applications can come from existing organizations. Hopefully I've responded to that. You don't need to have examples of projects where you've used geospatial data necessarily. I think that's exactly what we're here to do. We're here to understand about what you tried to achieve as an organization, how we could maybe integrate data into that and help you to achieve even more, and meet your objectives even better.
Nikki, there's two questions around funding, if you want to answer that. One, yeah, if there's going to be any funding support, and another one around travel expenses for those that will be going to the training sessions, and also asking who is actually going to be organizing those and booking those rooms. If you'd like to.
Yeah, I was going to just work my way down. So no, there's no funding. So this facility is technical assistance. So there's no funding amount that comes with that support. It's kind of in-kind support being offered. In terms of travel, so a lot of this we want to be as responsive as possible to what the organizations require. So that scoping assessment that I talked about up front will be the time at which we understand and discuss between the capacity building experts, so Map Action and Humanitarian OpenStreetMap teams, and yourselves, exactly what timeframe we're going to work on, how much of it we can do face-to-face versus virtual, if there are face-to-face meetings, where that's going to be. So if all of that will be worked out at the scoping assessment phase, but we absolutely intend for there to be face-to-face time where it's going to be valuable. And so in that sense, the expenses of that will be covered. But in terms of booking, I think that will be dependent on what rooms people have available and what we need to do. So it's hard to give a general answer to that question, but I'll put some more details on the FAQ about some of that, but some of it will come out as we start to actually talk about organizations. Some organizations might all be co-located in an office that has space for that, some won't. So it's hard to kind of generalize. I've just got a few more minutes. So the specific outputs of this training also really dependent on your needs and what you're trying to do. But what we would really like to be able to do is really be very practical about how to integrate data. So understanding how you currently make decisions and how geospatial data could be integrated into your existing processes. So, who needs to be involved? What kind of software do you have already or not have? Do you prefer to use a map versus spreadsheets? Like we really need to understand your organization, how you work, and then figure out what the outputs will be for you, but with the real intention for this to be something that is sustainable for you. So something that can endure after this technical engagement is finished, that is something that your organization can continue to do. So that's the main priority, rather than us specifying exact outputs. Prerequisites I think I've covered, but if I haven't, please ask more. If there's any more specifics of that, please let me know. I've spoken about experience. I've spoken about the country eligibility. I'm not sure I understand the one about geospatial professionals under private consulting firms. So we're asking for people to tell us what kind of organization they are applying from. If you have a high level of existing geospatial expertise and support, you know, it's not the priority of where we're trying to go. We're trying to support those who don't yet have as much support. So yeah, that all I think has been covered in the eligibility. Okay, I think I've covered most of these. Apologies if I haven't yet. I will have a look through all of these questions once we finish this webinar, and we'll be producing a document that gives all of these a written response so that you can all look at that in your own time. The QR code for the call for applications is on the screen now. Carlotta also shared it before this webinar for those who haven't got access to a camera right now for the link. Thank you so much for attending the webinar. Thank you so much for your questions and your engagement throughout. We look forward to hearing from you and reading your applications. And yeah, best of luck to all of you, and hopefully we'll speak again soon. And thanks to Duncan and Gemma for sharing your insights as well from your organizations. All right, thanks a lot, everyone. We'll speak to you soon. Bye.